Hello, I'm Paul Fisher, a lead analyst with KuppingerCole, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Nick Nichols, who is Vice President of Product at NetIQ. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
And you've been here, we're now on Thursday.
Yep.
I've lost track a little bit.
I know how it goes. I had been an analyst myself at one point as well. For Gartner as part of my career, and this all becomes a blur. So I totally understand.
So there's life after being an analyst.
There is.
There's hope.
There is. Yes, there is hope.
Okay. So yeah, it's been like you say, it's been an interesting few days. I guess maybe the first question would be, what has stood out for you amongst the variety of presentations and keynotes?
I think there's a lot of good content. There's a lot of good information that's being conveyed. I think that's one of the best aspects of this. And I think it's also nice to finally be doing this again after a long drought of the pandemic, kind of making this more difficult. I think these kinds of conversations are things that we need to have in this industry, and in particular, I think that as I see this, identity really is becoming very much the new focal point for how digital transformation really is being brought forward. And it's funny because if you think about this, and I think this was represented by so many different angles in a lot of the different talks today, or not today, but through the week. Is that with this notion of identity, I mean, we've sometimes underplayed this. And I think it's actually much more fundamental. We sort of get into the habit of talking about this in terms of authentication and authorization and identity lifecycle management and whatnot. But really, when you think about what the role is that this plays and why this is so key to our securing these environments and helping facilitate this kind of digital transformation, is identity is a fundamental aspect of how we interact in general. I mean, if you think about our language, for instance, we talk about subjects acting on objects. Every sentence, has that structure of a noun and a verb, and it's all about the context of the subject and what the actions are. And what we're really doing with identity in this sense is deciding what's appropriate and what should be allowed to happen and what actions are to be, allowed to proceed, right? And so having that notion of this, as sort of this core element really starts to, I think, put in context all of these activities that we're doing, as an industry. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about this is that identity, it has a lot more, room to grow as far as this goes. And I think it's going to be a much more fundamental, element to how we actually, solve these problems.
I think sometimes you're right. We get so abstracted. We forget that behind all this is actually, people, and increasingly machines.
Yeah, exactly. It's anything that takes an action, right? Anything that can act on something else is an identity.
But they're doing stuff.
Yes.
And they're collaborating. And I think that we forget that, you're absolutely right. It's like, I think it's a problem. Well, not a problem, but I think it's like a tendency that we as analysts and vendors, that we get so focused on technology that we forget that actually if someone's buying it to do something, not
that's
just
right.
to say, oh, isn't that nice?
Yeah,
we've got this new platform. So so that's great. And let's talk a little bit about you, perhaps, and what you're doing with NetIQ. I know it's part of a bigger corporation.
Yes,
and some people, sometimes they might find it difficult to understand the structure of Micro Focus a little bit. So perhaps you could
certainly
enlarge on that.
There's been Micro Focus has been a company that has assembled quite a portfolio, and over the years has made a number of acquisitions, and so it's brought together a lot of capabilities that we are actually bringing together even further to help them work in concert. As part of this, one of the things that Micro Focus did just about 2 years ago was double down on the security business. So the board of directors at Micro Focus decided that we had acquired some phenomenal technology that really needed to breathe a little and needed to really be invested further in and taken to much more of a growth perspective. So they formed what's called our CyberRes security division. Okay, with this focus on how do we help enterprises build up cyber resiliency. Okay, so that's the thrust of the name. Okay. And within CyberRes, we have a number of brands that focus on different elements of security. NetIQ, the one I'm responsible for, is focused around the identity and access management challenges. In addition to that, we also have, for security operations, we have our ArcSight brand. We ended up getting, as part of our data security portfolio, Voltage, that does format preserving encryption, as well as some amazing technologies around data discovery and data classification to really help address that series of problems of how do you enact a process of being a good data steward. One of the things that you need to understand is where is your data and what kind of sensitivity does that data have, and then you can make decisions around how are you going to protect it. Okay, and then also Fortify is another one of our key pillars of CyberRes, which is focused around application security, in particular, application vulnerability scanning. And then we also made an acquisition of another company called Interset that really focused on unsupervised machine learning and AI and other machine learning techniques. Right.
So that's quite a set of technologies there. I mean, you mentioned data governance, and that's you're kind of really well set up now. You kind of covered identity. You've got data governance.
Yes.
You've got logs and analytics.
Yes, being able to monitor the environment and look for threats. And
are you tempted at any time to maybe brand them all so that it just becomes one big old platform, or is that not what the market wants?
Well, so right now, that's part of the challenge, right? Yeah. Is that there are different buyers at each of these different levels, and they haven't fully unified. But we are looking at this from the perspective of the CyberRes platform.
Yeah.
Okay. So why it's sort of this layered cake that we have, right? Is that if you're focused on identity and access management, NetIQ is where the portfolio is, right? But NetIQ is part of CyberRes, and if you're looking at the bigger picture, you'd be looking at the CyberRes portfolio. Okay. And so the way the way I see this is that they all work together at different levels, but it depends on what part you're focusing on at a time, and also the maturity of the company. And so our focus around this is really to help fill in the gaps and help progress that maturity for our customers, because everybody has tackled these problems in lots of different ways, and mostly it's been in a reactive position. Where you have a problem, you have a breach, you have a security challenge, and so you find a solution to slap onto it to fix it, but you don't necessarily think through what the bigger issues are, how this fits in context of your broader security positioning. So what ends up happening is a lot of these organizations will just start putting these point solutions together, and they're not working together, they're not interoperating. And one of the things that I covered in my presentation here at the conference was talking about how many organizations have 70 plus security vendors within their environment. And it's just because of this sort of reactive mode instead of thinking about this more proactively. And what we're looking to do with this is, well, since there's a lot of stuff out there, there are a lot of gaps. And if you have a comprehensive approach to this, we don't do this in an all or nothing kind of model. It's how do we fill those gaps? We have enough pieces that we can fill those gaps wherever you might need. And if you happen to like some of our stuff better than maybe some of the stuff that you've already used, that's wonderful. We can help you out there too. But it's more of a modular approach. Right. But yet at the same time, we also focus on trying to bring this integrated platform together as well.
Okay, so people watching this will potentially be your customers or your potential customers. How do they approach you? They realize that perhaps they have an identity management problem or a privilege access management problem or data governance problem. What's the process of a customer? You know, they start looking around at solutions and vendors, but then they get confused because there's a lot of choice. So how do you work with a customer on a first time basis?
Well, so this is actually something that we've been, working very hard on building out our overall, approach to go to market, because, as this company has been kind of aggregated together over time, that has been a challenge to reach those customers. Now, we happen to have a very large installed base as well.
Yeah.
But we're actively, getting new customers all the time, and part of that is basically reaching them at the levels that they're having these challenges. So communicating what kinds of solutions we can bring to bear, helping them understand sort of the bigger picture. So it's a combination of communicating the strategy, but also helping them immediately with their immediate needs. Identifying interesting use cases that we can really help solve for them. And I mean, everything from, and because we have such a rich portfolio, we can bring so much of this to bear, that it really does kind of help bring them along for the ride.
So it's kind of a bit of a consultancy in there?
We do some of that, but a lot of this is with partners.
Right.
A lot of this is, so I mean, we work with partners and integrators to help, bring these solutions to these customers, but it's also, having conversations and engaging and talking about their problems. So,
and I believe it's a British company originally.
It's the headquarters is in the UK.
Yeah.
But we're worldwide.
Yeah.
And I'm actually based out of California.
Yeah. Well, I can tell from your accent, you're not one of me. So, that's great. So, what else would you say to people? Let's maybe I imagine you have a lot of large corporates, but do you meet smaller businesses? Do they have different problems or challenges?
So there's we tend to focus on the large enterprises. I mean, that just seems to be where our sweet spot is. And I think that there is a difference as you the way I envision it is that you have kind of a pyramid.
Yeah.
Right. And at the very top, you have the really, really very large, very specialized, corporations. And then it starts to sort of broaden out where you have more and more, companies that fill that volume and become, as you get closer to the bottom of the pyramid, more small to medium business. Right. So you have, a very, very large path towards helping kind of the mom and pop shops. The level of sophistication of a lot of our offerings tends to keep us more at the top third, I would say, rather than going all the way down. Yeah. But I also think there's opportunities to, as we simplify things, to reach a broader audience.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge that I see is that, and I'll just sort of focus on identity and access management more specifically, is that, I mean, it can be a complex problem to solve. And as we started in this industry, as you know, many companies were looking at this saying, I want you to do this way. I want you to come to me and do it my way. And there was a lot of customization as part of that. And unfortunately, that customization also leads to a lot of brittleness. And that means that it's very difficult to keep in a sustainable mode. And so there's been a lot of recycling of these solutions over time within these organizations as well. And I think that as companies have started to mature, they're starting to realize that it doesn't have to be my way. And other companies that are coming into the fold are saying, well, I'm not sure what the right way is, so will you sort of guide me? So I think that part of the opportunity here is to make this easier by being more prescriptive, providing a more sustainable approach to it, providing best practice, as part of the product. Yeah. Making this less customized.
That's a great point. Making best practice part of the product. Yeah. I haven't heard that. That's a great idea.
And I think because it comes back to this whole thing is that we have to be able to solve the broader set of requirements without dumbing it down.
Yeah.
And I think there has been a shift in the market to some degree around the fact that, especially as we go more to SaaS, so customers don't have the skill sets necessarily to do this themselves. They want somebody to run and operate it for them.
Yeah.
But and it's hard to keep that skill set too if you do have it. That they're looking for easier to consume answers, but to make it easier to consume, a lot of things that we've seen in the market has basically simplified it by narrowing the requirements, and I think that is a problem.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that now you're not solving the actual problems that the customers are having. You're addressing some of them, and as long as that's the only thing the customer is looking for, then okay, that's great. But many customers have this many requirements, and you're only addressing this many. And so our focus is how can we address the broader set of requirements, but make it still simple enough that they can consume it without going into this sort of heavier consultative model.
Yeah. So finally, then, do you deal with the CSO level, or do you deal maybe a bit below that, or even on a line of business level when people are?
We do each. I mean, we often talk to CISOs, and that's a key audience that we engage with. But we also work with the practitioners as well. And the idea here again is that we try to be mindful of the different personas, whether it's at what level are they solving the problem, and try to make sure that we can meet them at that level and help. And so some of the products that we have, because of this modularity, can be delivered as a point solution, but the idea is that it can be in the context of a bigger solution as well. And we try to provide that in a way that a customer might just have a privileged access management challenge right now, for example, but then well, what is that in context to their broader access management and in context with their broader access governance? So all of these things are related. So, which part do you want to start with? Is it this problem that you're going to solve first? Well, we can work with them at that level and then talk about the bigger picture of how we can actually help them progress to a much more adaptive model and something that's more, again, like I said, the goal of being sustainable.
Okay. So finally,
okay.
You've been, I don't know how many years you've been coming to this conference, but do you feel that we're making progress?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, so it's.
I don't mean the conference itself.
No. I think we have as an industry. Okay, there have been challenges, and there's times when it feels like as an industry we've kind of stalled. Yeah. Right. Some things that we've thought about. Seems like we've been talking about this forever. Why haven't we solved this problem yet? Right. But I think as we started the conversation a little bit too, is that we sort of get caught up into this mode of thinking about certain technologies, and we don't think about the bigger picture.
Sure.
But I think that what I see that's the progress is that you start to see how all this starts coming together. Discussions around fabrics, discussions around how this is all related. Yeah. And how you need to have these components as part of this underlying infrastructure to be able to build all of these other capabilities on top of. I think is really where we're heading. And now I think the key where we're really seeing this is okay, so we're going to be addressing multi-cloud environments. We're going to we need to have this simple and easy to understand and be able to have the right processes in place. So all of these requirements are actually being addressed effectively in the much more complex environment. And while we're also doing all of this, how do we lessen the burden on the decision maker? How do we help them understand what's going on? And I think that as a key there is that bringing in these new techniques and new technologies around, like unsupervised machine learning to help reduce the cognitive load and help make smart decisions and automate a lot of this. So that way, all these things are working together in concert without having to require every little lever to be pulled every single time by an individual.
Fantastic. Nick, it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Well, thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
2 whole days, 2.5, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.